The Spotlight, shining a light on podcasts and videos that have caught our attention.
Hi and welcome to The Spotlight. My name is Jen Spiker and today I'll continue highlighting a video from Creation Ministries International. The Ice Age is a topic that often creates more questions than answers. Secular scientists have major trouble modelling how even one ice age could start in the real world, never mind multiple ice ages. However, geologist Dr. Tas Walker believes we can unravel the mysteries of the Ice Age by considering what the Bible says. After all, if the Bible is a true record of history, it stands to reason that it will help us make sense of the past.
The Spotlight with Jen Spiker.
So are you saying here, Tas, that one of the reasons we're so scared about climate change now is because we've tried to explain the Ice Age without the Bible?
That's exactly right. And it's interesting, Noah's flood, and we get to that, get to the effects of Noah's flood. But after the flood, the Bible records that God said, he said this, that while the earth remains, there'll be seed time and harvest, summer and winter, cold and heat. In other words, there's an implication there that God has created a stable system. And we'll see, I'll explain just why it is indeed a stable system and how the evidence comes to show that, and that there's really no cause for this, cataclysmic alarmism that's in our culture today.
Okay, so you're saying that God says, I've given you a stable system. After the flood, I'm not going to flood the world again. I'm going to give you seasons. So, and I guess this kind of matches up with nature in general, because the majority, although there are positive feedback mechanisms in nature, the majority of natural or biological systems, we see negative feedback loops, which I guess is support for the design inference that, okay, things are designed, so God's designed things to not get out of control.
That's right. The system is basically stable.
Yeah. But you're saying to make the Ice Age work, you need a positive feedback loop.
Well, that's what they've included in their model. They've got a model for how it works. Yeah. And so it doesn't really produce enough, so they've added this thing in. Yep. But even if it did work, even if it did produce enough temperature change, it still wouldn't produce an Ice Age. That's because to produce ice, you not only need a cool temperature, you also need water. And so if you just cool the earth, basically we end up with cold deserts and not heaps of ice, not ice sheets that cover the deserts. And so that's the second thing. And that's the other way in which the biblical history and Noah's flood explains how to get water as well as, well, not necessarily coolness, but how you get the water which is going to produce the ice.
Wow. Okay. So I want to get onto that, but just to cover what we've said so far, the issue with the Ice Age, the mystery of the Ice Age, which was that question I had at the start, is one, the current theories, the most popular theory, the Milankovitch cycle theory, does not get the Earth cold enough unless you include these feedback mechanisms, which we're saying are unlikely because positive feedback mechanisms are more rare, negative feedback mechanisms are more common. But secondly, there's not enough moisture in the air or enough precipitation to make the ice and the snow. Is that right? So there's two big problems.
Well, there's two, and there's another one as well.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It's not really a fatal problem, but it's a problem that they're wrestling with. Yeah. And that's the Milankovitch cycle. It's cyclical. Yep. Happens over and over and over again.
Yes.
So from the uniformitarian, their particular position that what's happening in the present has happened in the past, always been the same. So they would expect multiple Ice Age over and over and over and over again for as long as the Earth's existed. But they identify that there's sort of advances and retreats of the ice sheet in the Quaternary Ice Age, the one that's the most recent one. But although they identify those, they don't really see much evidence for really cold periods in other parts of geological history. So any time that they sort of see scratches or they see broken rock, they interpret it as an ice age. But those evidences are quite different from the rocks and scratches that we see for the most recent ice age. And so that's part of the problem that they have. Although they do speak about something like 4 ice age periods. There's a couple, there's one, I think, in the Cambrian, and there's one in the Permian that's there, and then there's one in the Precambrian. It's actually the one in the Precambrian. The idea is that the whole Earth was covered in ice. Wow. They give it a name. It's called Snowball Earth. And that creates problems for itself, but that's just the period there. And then there's another one a bit earlier. So there's 4 periods with basically, it's a bit surprising that the Earth seems to be so warm. It seems to have such a warm period. And that comes from misinterpreting the geology as well. And so the biblical history changes that as well.
So you're saying there's not just one ice age, at least in the secular view. There's 5 main ones that one you're saying there's good evidence for. We can see on the surface all those evidence, as you said at the start. But those other 4, you're saying that's in the sedimentary rock. Sedimentary layers, they can see scratches and so striations and things like this. But you'd say that evidence isn't as strong as the one for the most recent one.
Evidence doesn't speak for itself.
Yeah, true.
Evidence is interpreted. And so when the geologists see this evidence, they see evidence of scratches, and this great big heaps of broken rock. They assume that that's an old ice age. But you can get broken rock and all this material by other processes. And from a biblical perspective, when you look at the biblical flood, and we'll get onto that, when you look at the biblical flood and the enormity of that catastrophe, particularly at the beginning of the flood, and how the flood waters were washing in sediment, broken rock, you end up with lots of what they call underwater avalanches. So these things occur underwater, and they get great big heaps and piles of this sediment and broken rock, and they just automatically say, oh, that's tillite. That's as a result of a glacier. It's automatically interpreted that way, and usually by young geologists who go out and look at it. And once they've made the interpretation, people don't go back and change it. They just accept what's been said and then build on it. So it's sort of leading down an interpretation which is producing things that don't work. And so what happens? Guess what they call it? Mysteries. The Bible explains it. That's the amazing thing. When you start with biblical history, it just flows out of that. You don't have to add in secondary hypotheses and all those sorts of things. And not only that, it gives insights to things that you'd expect, and then when you go and look, you see them. And so I'll talk about some of those later.
I really want to get onto that, Tas. But first of all, I just wanted to clarify something you were saying earlier. You were saying there's an issue with having multiple ice ages in the distant past because some of those ice ages, is this correct, that some of those ice ages are in layers of sedimentary rock where you find animals that lived in very hot or temperate environments? And so how did those animals survive that ice age? Is that one of the problems you're referring to?
Well, that is one of the problems. You find not just animals, but you find plants as well, which you find them buried in sediments which are very high latitudes. So in areas which are cold today, and yet these plants are tropical sorts of plants.
Yep.
And so how do you solve that? That's another question as well. And so the idea is that the continents moved over millions of years, and so the plants grew differently. But again, the biblical ice age, the biblical model solves that.
So the mysteries we've said so far, the big mystery is it's not cold enough. There's not enough water and moisture to bring enough ice. But there's some other mysteries that you haven't mentioned, but I'm sure you could comment on them, and I'm wondering if you could comment on them. One of them is, what about Siberia and Alaska being even in the last ice age? The lowlands of Siberia and Alaska were not covered with ice because they had a lot of animal and plant life there. Another one being that the fossil record shows that, just talking about the last ice age, that the majority of large animals died off at the end of the ice age, not during. And you would have thought it would be after the ice age that they would live and flourish. So there's a number of these other smaller mysteries. And could you comment on them before we talk about how the biblical model explains
it? Well, I think if we talk a little bit about the model to begin with, that will help to set the scene. Okay. But basically what happens is, when something doesn't fit, it's called a mystery. We know, we see that there's been a lot of large animals, which very large, greater than something like 100 pounds, 40 kilograms or something, that lived in continents around the world that died out at the end of the Ice Age.
Yeah.
How did that happen? And so what caused that? And there's various ideas. Some say, well, they were hunted by people. People killed them. And yet a lot of these animals died out before there were people living in the area. Another one is that these animals got sick. They called it over-ill, the over-ill idea. And that doesn't really work. Another one is, they call it the over-chill, is that the climate changed. And that one does seem to work. And that's, again, explained by the biblical flood and by the biblical model. You see, the Bible, I'll just get onto that. The Bible tells us about the global flood, which affected the whole of the earth. It talks about the fountains of the deep breaking open. And in the rocks and that which were deposited in the flood, we see a lot of evidence for volcanic activity. They used to call them large, igneous provinces. And we got evidence for that. There's the ring of fire around the Pacific, volcanic eruptions. These occurred during the flood. And so at the end of the flood, after the waters had run off the land, the oceans were warmer than they are today. And so a number of degrees, 10 degrees or something warmer. And that's widely recognized with these ice cores that go down. It's recognized the change of isotope ratios, that they were warmer in the past towards the bottom of the ice cores. And so warmer oceans, that means that there's a lot more evaporation. So the evaporation produces snow and rainfall, precipitation on the continents. So that produces the water. So the snow on the continents builds up. And so immediately after the flood, these conditions allowed for the ice and snow and ice to start building up on the continents. Plus there was one other thing that was present at the end of the flood. With the volcanic activity, there would have been a lot of volcanic dust high, really high in the atmosphere. And so that would prevent the sunlight coming in and reduce the amount of melting that occurred in summer. And so from summer to summer, from year to year, you have this ice building up on the continents. And it starts, of course, in the higher elevations and then eventually comes down into the lower elevations and the ice builds up.
This is The Spotlight, and we've been hearing Dr. Tas Walker in part of a long-form interview produced by Creation Ministries International, exploring the mysteries of the Ice Age. As Tas points out, the Bible answers the questions that secular scientists have grappled with for years. I'm Jen Spiker, and next time on The Spotlight, we'll hear more of this conversation with Dr. Tas Walker, including an explanation of how warm seas occurred and how they contributed to the Ice Age. If you can't wait and want to watch the interview in full, you can do that right now in the Free Vision app. Just tap the Watch tab and scroll to the Creation Ministries International channel for this and other interviews.
For more great podcasts and videos like the one featured today, check out vision.org.au or the Free Vision app.